Come live the dream of flight. Join us as we travel through time and interact with history. Explore the lives of the men and women who dared to live a universal dream. From two papermakers who challenged the sky to two bicycle mechanics who changed the world. From the men who broke the records to the women who broke the rules. The history of flight is not merely the story of one people, but of all people. Discover this world of flying with an interactive map and witness historic moments from more than a dozen different countries. Learn the key principles of flight, or visit the Flight Gallery with over 20 planes under your control. The Wright Flyer, the Douglas World Cruiser, the Spirit of St. Louis. Bring along the entire family for this exciting, innovative, and interactive history. Come relive the universal dream. We all dream of flying. Hasn't every child raced down some grassy hill, arms outstretched like feathered wings, straining against nature to capture the wind? Haven't we all awakened from sleep to the memory of effortless flight, disappointed to remember we're human after all? We all have. It is a longing for transcendence, for overcoming the limits of our birth. Early cave dwellers, too, must have envied the birds and their seemingly boundless fields of air. Envy became ritual, with dances about the fire, arms flapping, feathers tucked behind the ears. Ritual became story, legend, myth. Myths are more than stories. They are archetypes drawn from the well of human experience and belief. They offer structure to our dreams, a roadmap to the human psyche. Consider Daedalus, who dreamed of flying from his prison on the Isle of Crete. With wings made of feathers and wax, he and his son Icarus flew to freedom. Theirs was a universal impulse, a dream we all share, to soar above our troubles, leaving the cares and worries of the world below. Seduced by the freedom of flight, however, Icarus flew too close to the sun, melting the wax that held his wings. Inspired by ancient myths, a few brave dreamers began to test the limits of human flight. It must have seemed easy at first. Feathers fashioned into wings, stairs leading to the top of a tall tower. The air spread out like an open field below. An invitation to fly. For centuries, human flight remained the province of myth and imagination. Leonardo da Vinci, an artist and a scientist, a dreamer and a mechanical genius, carried those ancient dreams into a modern laboratory. Leonardo was not alone. Everyone thought they knew how to fly. Throughout Europe, dreamers began putting pencil to paper, hoping to discover the secret of the birds. A few of these flying machines may actually have been built. Some were complex, others were simple. Some were reasonable, others ridiculous. But they all had one thing in common. None of them could fly. Since before the taming of fire, people have understood that hot air rises. The nomads of the Arabian Peninsula saw heat shimmer over the sand and imagined an ethereal flying form, the genie, who could lift himself by swallowing the hot desert air. Perhaps the answer to the riddle of human flight was there all along, in myth and in art. As it was, the advent of practical human flight waited patiently for another 2,000 years. Waited for two curious brothers and a small paper bag. Thousands came to Paris on that cold November morning in 1783. They came from the French provinces, from Spain, from England. Even a few Americans had the good fortune to attend what promised to be the most wondrous event of their lives. A man was about to fly. The Chinese claim to have invented the balloon in the 13th century, though there is little proof of its ever having flown. The key to balloon flight was already known in Greece. In the 3rd century BC, Archimedes discovered the physical law of buoyancy. This principle, which enables a ship to float in the water, would one day enable a balloon to float in the air. Francesco de Lana combined these ideas in this fanciful design from 1670. Because lighter-than-air gases were unknown at the time, de Lana's imaginary airship relied on 4 vacuum spheres to achieve lift. With the isolation of hydrogen by Henry Cavendish in 1766, lighter-than-air flight seemed possible at last. But when early experimenters began filling paper bags with the new gas, it escaped through the pores of paper like water through a sieve. In fact, the first successful balloons used hot air instead of hydrogen. Perhaps what they needed most was not a better gas, but better paper. Joseph and Etienne Montgolfier were born into a family of paper makers. The brothers were a study in contrast. Etienne, the hard-working, self-disciplined, respectable one. Joseph, the romantic, the dreamer. The one thing they shared was their fascination for science. Joseph's dreams and his brother's pragmatism finally came together in 1782, when Joseph wondered aloud,
"If clouds can float in the sky, why not capture a cloud inside a bag?"
They immediately set about creating their own cloud, a black, noxious billow of smoke. While they knew nothing of clouds, they knew everything about paper, and quickly fashioned several lightweight bags of taffeta and cord. Filled with hot air, the bags rose quickly, placing 2 curious Frenchmen forever in the history books. The French Academy of Science commissioned Monsieur J.A.C. Charles to study the matter at once. Charles released the first hydrogen balloon in August of the following year. Unoccupied, it sailed over Paris and beyond. Villagers watched in terror as it descended from the sky. They circled the beast as it rolled and belched along the ground. They pummeled it with rocks and pierced it with pitchforks, till the skin sagged and fell silent, their village safe once more. By September, the Montgolfiers had built a hot air balloon with enough lift to carry the weight of a human being. Volunteers were scarce, however, so the honors went to a sheep, a rooster, and a duck. The animals rose together above the court of Versailles, and all of Paris looked on as they floated out of sight. France came alive with talk and speculation. Some thought the Montgolfiers would ascend themselves, but Joseph refused. King Louis XVI decreed that 2 prisoners under sentence of death would be the first to test the new invention, until a brash young scientist named François Pilatre de Rosier stepped forward to request the honor. The king agreed, but ordered the Marquis d'Arlanne to accompany him. 400,000 people descended on the gardens of the Château de la Muette to witness the event. At exactly 54 minutes past 1 o'clock on November 21st, 1783, with all of Paris assembled below, Rosier and his terrified companion became the first men ever to rise above the earth in free flight. They spent 25 minutes in the air, drifting over Paris and along the Seine. As Benjamin Franklin wrote after watching Rosier and the Marquis disappear over the Paris cityscape,
"It appears to be a discovery of great importance, and what may possibly give a new turn to human affairs."
he was right. The age of flight had finally arrived. Etienne and Joseph Montgolfier had at last allowed the dreamers to take to the sky. And no one promoted this new recreation more than French showman Jean-Pierre Blanchard and his wife Marie. With new travels came new tragedies. Ironically, the first man to fly was also 2 years later ballooning's first fatality. In 1785, Rosier and his partner Jules Romain designed a new type of balloon in an attempt to cross the English Channel. Rosier's bravery was matched only by his foolishness. His idea was to combine both hot air and hydrogen into a single ship. Minutes into flight, the envelope exploded in a huge fireball. Both men were dead before they hit the ground. But the greatest dangers were yet to come, as ballooning evolved from a sport in the 18th century to a weapon of mass destruction in the next. Francesco Delana had warned of this 200 years before.
Houses, fortresses, and cities could thus be destroyed, with the certainty that the airship would come to no harm, as the missiles could be thrown from a great height.
Heroes are cut from various cloths. Some are destined for war, others for exploration. Salomon André was the latter. In 1897, he and his companions attempted to reach the North Pole by air, floating without fear into the Arctic void. Their remains were found 33 years later on the White Island coast. Ballooning became a popular pastime in the late 18th century. But if these new lighter-than-air machines were going to be of any use, they would have to be controllable. In the mid-19th century, men like Henri Giffard, Charles Renard, and Arthur Krebs began adding engines and air screws to an elongated envelope, creating a new class of powered, fully controllable balloons, the dirigibles. And although these men were brilliant and dedicated inventors, they lacked the single-minded obsession of the man who would soon overshadow them all, Alberto Santos Dumont. Born into a wealthy Brazilian family, Santos Dumont was given everything in life except the one thing he desired most, the ability to fly like a bird. That he would have to do for himself. Though Santos Dumont proved the practicality of dirigible flight, his airships were limited in size. The larger the envelope, the more likely it was to collapse. Large airships required a sturdy frame. At the turn of the century, the French began experimenting with semi-rigid designs. But it was a German, Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, who ushered the airship into the modern era. After Zeppelin, the lighter-than-air machine had little more to offer. Soon, the heavier-than-air flying machines would have their day. It would be a new era with new challenges. But with the dirigible, the promise of the Montgolfiers had been fulfilled.